Hi everyone, my name is Solange Bohling. Unfortunately, I couldn't make it to TAG 2024 in person, so Ellie and Howard have kindly let me post my talk on ArchaeoData. The content of this talk will combine research from my digital archaeology MSc at the University of York and my work with the Archaeology Data Service, or the ADS, as a digital archives assistant. Today, I'm going to discuss online dissemination of digital bioarchaeological data using the ADS as a case study. We will discuss ethics, user preferences, and contextualization, and explore how these can inform good practice with regards to the dissemination of digital bioarchaeological data. So before I continue, I would like to make viewers aware that this talk includes images of human remains. I'd also like to provide some signposting for the format of this talk. First, I'm going to provide some background information about what digital bioarchaeological data is, why it's important, and how ethical approaches must be incorporated into this field of study. Then, I will briefly describe the methodology and results of my MSc research and the suggestions I compiled regarding responsible dissemination of digital bioarchaeological data. Next, I will briefly discuss how I applied what I learned from this research to a case study ADS archive. And finally, I will consider what I've learned during my time working on this case study and other similar ADS archives with large volumes of digital bioarchaeological data, and how this can inform how developers, depositors, and disseminators might proceed with regards to sharing this type of data. With an increase in the use of digital recording technologies in commercial and academic archaeological contexts, there has been an increase in the creation and dissemination of digital data that depicts human remains. With this increase and the potentially sensitive nature of this type of data, there is an urgent need to establish ethical guidelines for the creation, use, and sharing of digital bioarchaeological data. So what is digital bioarchaeological data and why is it important? It has been described as, quote, any data that represent human remains in a digital format and can include spreadsheets which contain osteological data or 2D or 3D visualizations of human remains. This type of data can be collected either during excavation when the skeleton is still in situ, as demonstrated in Figure 1 with Richard III's grave, or in post-excavation analysis, when specific groups of bones or single elements can be scanned, as demonstrated in Figure 2. Common ways of recording digital bioarchaeological data include photography, radiography, photogrammetry, laser surface scanning, structured light scanning, and CT and MRI scanning. Digital models of human remains have considerable value in curation, research, teaching, and outreach contexts. The existence of a digital or printed model of human remains can reduce the risk of damage by physical manipulation, provide researchers with access to remains that might have been impossible or too expensive, difficult, or far away to access physically, be used for outreach and engagement with the general public, and help with post-excavation analysis, diagnoses, and measurements. All of the types of digital bioarchaeological data mentioned can be deposited with the ADS. The ADS is a UK-based CoreTrustSeal accredited digital repository for archaeological and historic environment data. It primarily receives data from UK-based archaeological excavations and projects that are developer-funded or research-based, and its designated user community is, quote, archaeological practitioners and researchers based in the UK. With an increase in both the use of digital recording and analysis techniques and the discovery of new large-scale archaeological cemeteries, the ADS is increasingly becoming responsible for the curation of large volumes of digital bioarchaeological data. Therefore, an exploration as to how the ADS might disseminate this type of sensitive data was essential. So now this leads me to the second part of this talk, my MSc research. In order to examine how potential ADS users prefer to be presented with digital bioarchaeological data in an official repository context, an online Qualtrics survey was developed. The content of the survey drew on an in-depth literature review pertaining to ethics within the field of digital bioarchaeology. On this slide, I've provided several key considerations and suggestions that were addressed in the existing literature with regard to the creation and sharing of digitized human remains. I've listed some select sources for this content at the bottom of the slide, and other relevant sources that I used are listed in the reference section on the final slides. Important topics in the existing literature include purpose, justification, permission, access, and ownership. One of the topics that was probably most discussed was the idea that context is key when it comes to the creation and dissemination of digital bioarchaeological data. Drawing on the topics addressed in the previous slide, the main part of the Qualtrics survey consisted of 10 questions organized into 4 blocks. These addressed participant familiarity with the ADS, pop-up content advisories, contextual information, archive-specific ethics statements, and terms of download. The survey also asked about the participants' experience or interest in archaeology or a related field, and optional questions regarding gender, age, nationality, and religion were included at the end. Optional text responses were allowed for many of the questions, allowing participants to elaborate on their answers. The anonymous link to the Qualtrics survey was disseminated through social media, mailing lists, and personal requests, and responses were collected between the 26th of June and 13th of July, 2023. The 344 participants who completed more than 50% of the survey were included in the final dataset. A large majority of participants had some form of academic or commercial archaeological experience, which makes sense given the content of the survey and where it was disseminated. A majority of respondents identified as female, were between the ages of 25 and 44, were from either the UK or the USA, and were not religious. First 3 questions asked if participants had used the ADS before, and if they were aware of the terms of use and access and the sensitive data guidance. About half of participants had never used the ADS website before. When only considering participants who had previously used the ADS, 82% were aware of the terms of use and access, while only around 49% were aware that the sensitive data guidance addressed human remains. This suggests that currently, ADS users who might download digital bioarchaeological data are not aware of the ADS's policy with regards to ethical reuse of this sensitive type of data. So based on these results, I would suggest that there needs to be a clear link to the sensitive data guidance in all archives that contain data from human remains, so that users are aware of how they should be reusing this type of data. The next several questions addressed if and where content pop-up advisories were necessary prior to viewing human remains on the ADS website. A majority of participants, 66%, believe that the ADS should provide content advisories for archives that contain images of human skeletal remains, as shown in Figure 5. This majority held when comparing responses from participants with and without archaeological experience and participants from the USA and the UK. A common opinion of those who thought content advisories were not required was that people who would be using the ADS would already be aware that they might encounter human remains on the website. Others stated that providing content advisories was, quote, nonsensical, or, quote, OTT, while one person with no interest in archaeology said, quote, it's just dead bodies. On the other hand, many participants who thought content advisories were necessary emphasized the fact that some people, even archaeologists, might be, quote, uncomfortable viewing human skeletal remains, and that doing so might be, quote, triggering. Many believed providing a content advisory was a common, quote, courtesy and would, quote, prevent harm to any sensitive viewers. Many participants who agreed with the inclusion of pop-up content advisories thought that adding an advisory would help to emphasize the identity and importance of the once living human beings behind the digital data. So based on these results, my second suggestion is that the ADS should implement pop-up content advisories before users can view human remains. The next question addressed the inclusion of an archive-specific ethics statement in each archive that contained data from human remains. Although a slight majority of participants preferred an archive-specific ethics statement to be included, around 51%, a large portion of participants did not, around 30%, as shown in Figure 6. Many participants who responded no, or I'm not sure, to the inclusion of an archive-specific ethics statement explained how they believed a site-wide ADS ethics statement that specifically addresses human remains would be sufficient, and some participants were of the opinion that archives including data from human remains would not be different enough to merit different ethics statement. Many of the participants who responded yes advocated for the inclusion of an ethics statement to ensure respectful reuse of the data. Some also directly addressed the archive-specific aspect of the question by identifying that archives might need variable ethics statements based on the nature of the human remains involved. So this last point is something which I personally agree with, as the nature of a cemetery excavation can call for different ethical approaches. So for example, post-medieval cemeteries might contain identifiable individuals with living family members. It's possible that data from these individuals and information about their life histories would be included in the archive with permission of any living relatives. An ethics statement directly addressing the fact that permission was sought is very important and would differ from the ethics statement for, say, a Roman cemetery, which is very unlikely to have any identifiable individuals. So my third suggestion is that the ADS should provide archive-specific ethics statements for archives that include data from human remains. These could be based off several templates that can be reused based on the type of cemetery excavation. Or alternatively, the depositor could deposit the project-specific ethics statement or guidelines that they followed with the ADS as part of the archive. Either the templates or the depositor ethics statements should address consent for image sharing, or lack thereof, for unidentified individuals, and explain how scientific knowledge can be gained from contextualized archaeological individuals. The next question addressed whether participants believed an extra pop-up box asking users to agree to an ethics statement prior to download was necessary. A clear majority of participants believe the extra pop-up box should be included, around 65%, as shown in Figure 7. A few participants who answered no, or I'm not sure, raised the issue that the definitions of dignity and respect were subjective and culturally specific, which is something the ADS would need to address if proceeding with this extra pop-up box. Some also pointed out that a pop-up box would not be legally binding, and believe that asking users to agree to reuse the data ethically would be redundant. On the other hand, many participants who answered yes believed that this final pop-up box would serve as a reminder to users to reuse the bioarchaeological data in an appropriate way. Suggestion 4 is to include a pop-up box requesting that people remember that the data they are downloading comes from once living humans and that they use the data with regard for the identity of the deceased. The idea toward the pop-up as a request, rather than asking for an agreement, was actually brought up by a participant. It won't actually be possible to implement repercussions for misusers, so by requesting that people use the data appropriately, the message doesn't become superfluous. The final question addressed if and how much contextual information ADS users wanted alongside a 3D model depicting human remains. As shown in Figure 8, close to 100% of participants wanted technical, location, funerary, and osteological data to accompany these models. The question investigating how much contextualization was desired, which refers to the figure on the slide, asked participants about which boxes they would prefer to see alongside the 3D model. Box 1, which was the 3D model and technical metadata, boxes 1 and 2, which added in links to associated data files, or boxes 1, 2, and 3, which added in locational, funerary, and osteological information. The full wording of this question included the fact that creating data linkages during the production of individualized web pages for each 3D model would potentially increase the workload of the ADS and archival costs. Considering this, a large majority of respondents preferred boxes 1 and 2, or boxes 1 through 3, 86% combined, as shown in Figure 10. This suggests that despite the cost incurred, more contextual information was desired. When comparing the responses of participants with and without archaeological experience, it is clear that a larger percentage of those with experience preferred boxes 1 through 3 than those without experience, as shown in Figure 11. Those with archaeological experience are more likely to have used the ADS and probably recognize the value of having further contextual information despite the additional time and financial cost to a greater extent than someone without archaeological experience. Several participants who answered boxes 1 and 2 remarked that box 3 was helpful, but possibly unnecessary if it required too much time or financial cost, as the information in box 3 was technically available in box 2 if the user performed independent searching. On the other hand, many participants who answered boxes 1 through 3 argued that more information allows for better contextualization, which helps to, quote, humanize the remains and respect the deceased and their culture, and, quote, prevent assumptions that would otherwise arise without this data. My fifth and final suggestion is therefore that if it can be made manageable with regards to cost and time, the ADS should provide as much contextual information as possible alongside 3D models of human remains. This might include links to excavation photographs, drawings, context sheets, a searchable map interface for grave location, and post-excavation osteological analysis when it is provided. I will come back to this suggestion at the end of the talk to discuss its caveats and how my time as a digital archives assistant has informed how I think the ADS, depositors, and developers might proceed with regards to this suggestion. Okay, so the case study I'm going to discuss now included the enhanced contextualization of an HS2 cemetery archive that was unpublished at the time. This addressed the user preference that had the largest majority in the Qualtrics survey and would serve as an example for how the ADS's archiving process for large cemeteries might be developed to improve contextualization of individuals. The archive that was enhanced was from Wendover Green Tunnel in Buckinghamshire, which was excavated between 2020 and 2021 by Archaeology as part of the HS2 Phase 1 project. Of primary importance was the 5th to 6th century early medieval cemetery, which contained around 140 individuals, a majority of whom were inhumed rather than cremated. Archaeology deposited the excavation archive with ADS. As shown on this slide, the archive includes several main types of data, including GIS data, site and photogrammetry source photographs, photogrammetry models, scanned context sheets and drawings, reports, post-excavation data, and then metadata for all of these files. An individual skeleton contains links to almost all of these data types. For example, individual 605279 and or their grave cut was represented by model 87, recorded in original context sheets, photographed for general excavation 28 times, photographed for photogrammetric purposes 439 times, represented by polygon data as an excavated feature and had associated point-based data in the GIS files, and was included in the post-excavation spreadsheet with information about small finds, orientation, preservation, adult status, presence of pathology, etc. As part of the ADS's standard procedure, all of this data would be available for download through their website. As shown in Figure 14, for each model, the ADS's standard 3D protocol would include a browser-based viewable 3D model, zipped versions of the 3D model files and source images, metadata for the model, and the processing report for the creation of the model. A user wishing to find the skeleton's location within the cemetery, associated context sheets and excavation photographs, or osteological data would therefore need to do a considerable amount of perusing of the data to locate the information they needed. When InfoArchaeology deposited the archive with ADS, linkages between a 3D model and its other forms of associated contextual data were not easy to identify, and it was necessary to create these linkages manually. So this process included perusing the PDFs of original context sheets to identify the relevant page numbers for each model, using the captions included in the raster metadata spreadsheet to identify which excavation photos were associated with which model, and glancing through the PDF versions of the original drawings to identify relevant grave-related drawings. Each of these files was linked with the correct model, as demonstrated in Figure 15, which shows the current individualized webpage for individual 605279. The associated excavation photographs are now included beneath the 3D model, and a link to the relevant context sheet file is also provided. Based on the survey results, which suggested that users preferred individualized web pages for archaeological individuals, the ADS developed an interactive map interface that provides grave location, specific information about the excavated individual, and a link to the model page. This process involved determining a centroid coordinate for each burial using the GIS files and a considerable amount of data manipulation within ArcGIS and Microsoft Excel to create a usable format for this specific task, and using the post-excavation spreadsheet to collate all provided information about each individual, for example, preservation, completeness, age, sex, small finds, etc. From this information, a spreadsheet was created, which included a skeleton number and its associated context, grave fail and model numbers, polygon spatial coordinates, and post-excavation information. This spreadsheet was uploaded to the ADS Special Collections database, creating a map which identified the location of each excavated individual within the cemetery. The user can click on the point associated with each skeleton, and the contextual information appears as a pop-up as shown in Figure 16. This format allows users to place each individual in their appropriate context, drawing on all sources of data provided by InfoArchaeology. So finally, I'm going to discuss how the process of performing the enhanced contextualization process for a series of HS2 cemetery archives has informed how I believe the ADS, depositors, and developers might proceed with regards to the dissemination of digital bioarchaeological data. As I hope I've demonstrated, the process to more comprehensively contextualize a cemetery archive is complex and requires a considerable amount of time to complete. Therefore, Suggestion 5 could potentially be difficult to implement. Suggestion 5 places increased responsibility on the ADS to ensure that enough contextual information is provided, alongside images or 3D models depicting human remains. What constitutes enough is subjective, although it is anticipated that most commercial archaeology companies will deposit excavation context sheets for each burial, which can be used to pull out specific information about each individual, as seen with the Wendover Green Tunnel archive. While it's certainly positive that potential ADS users prefer more contextual information and identify that this is more respectful and allows for more informed data reuse, ensuring that the contextualization process is manageable with regards to time and financial costs is complicated. Since completion of the enhanced contextualization of the Wendover Green Tunnel archive, I've also performed similar processes for 2 further HS2 cemeteries. The archives deposited with the ADS for the cemeteries at St. Mary's Church, Stoke Mandeville in Buckinghamshire, and Fleet Marston, also in Buckinghamshire, include over 2,900 and 450 3D models, respectively. Given the magnitude of performing manual linkages for such a large number of individuals, the contextualization procedures that were adopted were scaled back when appropriate and were archive-specific. It is clear that the time and cost required to complete the archival process to that standard for such collections is higher than average, which was partially because of the format and organization of the bioarchaeological data that was deposited with the ADS. Bioarchaeological data is personal. It concerns the past lives of once living human beings. Based on the results of the Qualtrics survey, potential ADS users recognize this and prefer that such data be highly contextualized. As such, the time, effort, and cost to disseminate a bioarchaeological archive that is contextualized to this standard must be passed on to the developers. I suggest that commercial archaeology companies planning bids to excavate large cemeteries could factor more time and budget for data management into their proposals to developers so that they can deposit the data with the ADS in a format that allows for easier and more efficient contextualization of human remains. I suggest that data depositors and the developers financing their projects consider how a more individualized, contextualized, and custom dissemination of their cemetery archives with the ADS will help to appreciate the sensitivity and uniqueness of the bioarchaeological data. Even if this means the developer must budget more time for post-excavation data management, approaching dissemination of cemetery archives in this way will showcase that archaeology units and developers are promoting best practice, improve impact and engagement with the general public, help developers and archaeology units meet ethical requirements, make their data more reusable in the future, and perhaps most importantly, help to humanize the skeletons behind the data. Thanks very much for listening to my talk. I hope that it was helpful, but please do contact me if you have any questions. And I will now just scroll through the reference slides. Thank you very much.